Creating deliverables for Amazon and Filmub can be extremely confusing. In this video, I'm going to be giving you easy to follow instructions for creating each of the deliverables on both platforms. Full disclosure, this is a compilation of my last few videos. This video is for those who just want the entire process all bundled together in one video. The other videos are for those who are just looking for those specific problems and just want the individual videos. Regardless, these are the first steps you're going to want to take before self-distributing your film on either one of these platforms. You will need all the deliverables mentioned in this video to successfully pass QC and start making money. And of course, I will have each of these tutorials timestamped for easy reference. First, let's talk about actually creating the main video file. Having the right deliverables for your film is incredibly important. However, each distribution platform like Amazon, Filmub, etc. are going to have different requirements. Today, I will be showing you how to export your film correctly, including the video format, resolution, frame rate, bit rate, all to ensure that your film meets the technical specifications required by Amazon and Filmub. I will personally be using Adobe Premiere Pro for this tutorial, but don't worry, you can pretty much use any professional video editor and accomplish the same thing. However, those using consumer editors like CapCut or iMovie or something similar, I don't know if you're going to be able to accomplish the same thing. Follow this tutorial if you can, and if not, you may have to do an upgrade temporarily to finish your film. Before we get started, let's review the requirements on each of these platforms. And of course, both of these will be linked in the description for easy reference. I will say that we'll talk about both Amazon and Filmub, but honestly, if you follow the Filmub tutorial, you can pretty much use that file anywhere. So first, we're going to start with Amazon here, and there's a bunch of information. We're not going to go over every single thing on here just because that would make this tutorial way too long, but we'll go over some of the basics. Like I said, everything you pretty much are going to need is within Filmhub's requirements as well. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. They're pretty much the same for the most part. At the beginning, they say that source files must not contain bars and tone, test patterns, production slates, blah, blah, blah. So obviously you pretty much have to have the clean movie file by itself. No, like you're not exporting this for TV or anything like that. So you won't need anything like the slate or anything like that at the beginning or the end. All video assets uploaded to Prime Video Direct must have a progressive scan type. If your video contains interlace, please choose the de-interlace function on your video editor / transcoding software when exporting your video. The file header must accurately describe the display aspect ratio of the content. Anamorphic sources must include accurate 4:3 or 16:9 aspect ratio flags. So essentially they're saying that you are not going to be able to do this kind of natively. They're going to want either a 4:3 or a 16:9. So that may be the only difference between this and Filmub, where Filmub actually wants your original aspect ratio. So for instance, you have something that's in the scope because you shot anamorphic, you're probably going to have black bars at the top and the bottom. Or if you shot some other, skinnier, not necessarily skinnier, but more the square aspect ratio like 4:3, you might have the bars on the side. So they have a few different file codecs here. We have the AVC/H.264, which is the one I don't recommend using, but they do accept it if needed. We have ProRes 422, which is what I'm going to be using for this tutorial. And then we have MPEG-2 as well. Now, like I said, I'm going to be using ProRes 422. So if you want to use H.264, if you need to create a smaller video file, or if you need to use MPEG-2 for the same reason, that's fine. I'm not going to go over that here. We're going to primarily focus on ProRes 422. So for ProRes 422, we have a couple different things here. It's going to be in the .mov, so that'll be your tag at the end of the video file. It's going to be HQ, so we're going to export this in ProRes 422 HQ, not anything else, although I have tried it other ways and it was fine. So I don't think that's necessarily a requirement. The recommended bitrate is 220 megabits per second. And for HD, and for SD, it's 110 megabytes. We're going to be doing this, pretty much the standard Premiere export for 422. So won't worry about this too much. We'll have a look at what it says. Key interval frame, not applicable. ProRes files are iframe only, so wouldn't worry about that. Audio format, PCM. Recommended audio bitrate, lossless, sample rate, 48 kilohertz. And then down here we have some information for the recommended resolutions. So if you're doing something for SD, it needs to be at least 640 by 480 for 4:3, or 640 by 360 for 16:9. We're not going to do SD, but It's there if you only want to upload an SD for some reason, but we're going to focus on HD, which we have 1280 by 720. We're not going to use that. We're going to use the 1920 by 1080 because we want to have the best file possible. And then we should also note that Amazon Prime Video Direct currently doesn't support 4K UHD, so we're not even going to pay attention to 4K, although of course you can have a master file in 4K if you wish. And then they list the different frame rates. We're not going to focus on this too much because I'll just kind of go over my frame rate in the example. And then they have a list of the different aspect ratios if you have some sort of funky aspect ratio. If not, standard 16:9 is going to be fine for you. For frame rates, they recommend that you choose constant rates instead of variable frame rates because they will reject variable frame rates apparently. And it says they support the following frame rates. So most of you film nerds are probably going to be using 24 frames per second. So this 23,976 for the 24 is probably going to be your standard. And then we have the 25 frames per second for the European countries or whoever uses PAL, the PAL format. We're not going to pay attention to that. My film is in the 23,976. So that's what we're going to focus on in this tutorial. But if you do have some other frame rate, make sure you read this carefully to make sure that it, fits within their requirements. And then the bit rates, here's some information on bit rates, but we already talked about that earlier on what they require for SD and HD. So we'll go over that a little bit more when we actually go to export our file ourselves. And then they list some QC places, which I didn't know before. So that's pretty cool. But if you want to try to get your film QC'd before you even submit, here's a couple of places that they recommend. Maybe I'll talk about this in a future video because that's something I'm actually interested in and didn't actually realize until we were recording this video right here. So that's pretty cool. And then they list some common issues, but we'll talk about common issues here in a little bit. And then the same goes for trailers. They don't require a trailer, but I definitely recommend having a trailer. But they have two primary requirements: that it needs to be green band, so no swear words or nudity or anything like that. And the trailers can't be more than 6 minutes long. So if you are using a trailer, keep it normal trailer length and make sure it's appropriate for all audiences. And they have some audio stuff here too, so let's go over that really quick. All audio tracks in the source must be in the same language. The audio track must only contain a single full audio mix. So no M&E tracks or anything like that. It just needs to be all mixed together in either stereo or 5.1. The audio duration and the video duration obviously need to match. And then the audio must meet one of the channel requirements. So they list a bunch of channels. So mono, the stereo, like we mentioned, 5.1, 6 channel or 5.1, 8 channel. We're going to be focusing on stereo in this video because I don't have a 5.1 mix. So we're not going to worry about that. But if you do have a 5.1 mix, you can upload, I think you can upload both if I'm not mistaken. So that's pretty much it for Amazon. So let's go ahead and hop over to Filmub, which their requirements are pretty much the same, but let's quickly go over them because they have a couple interesting additional things that we need to talk about to try to minimize problems. So audio and video requirements for passing QC, quality control. Submit your video in the highest quality possible. We love 4K files, so they absolutely will take 4K, and they prefer Apple ProRes 422 or 422 HQ, not LT, Proxy 444, HQ, or any other. So 422 or 422 HQ. Again, with Amazon, I've uploaded 422 and not 422 HQ files there, so I don't think they really know the difference. But, if you want to be up to board and all that, I definitely recommend the 422 HQ when possible. And of course, they take Apple ProRes, they take the Avid files, but I'm not going to use that. So if you want to use that, cool. I'm focusing on Apple ProRes. And they do say that they will take H.264, H.265, MPEG-2, DV, blah, blah, blah. I don't recommend it. Like I said, they recommend the highest quality file possible. So let's focus on Apple ProRes 422 just because that's so widely accepted everywhere and preferred. So we're just going to focus on that for this tutorial. But if you need a smaller file for one reason or another, you have the H.264 available to you in the bit rates. So there you go. The different file types. So we're going to focus on the .mov because again, we're using Apple ProRes. Now here's where things get a little interesting because they have a little bit more requirements when it comes to the file itself. So It says max 2 seconds before the program starts and after the program ends, which basically means that your movie needs to start at least 2 seconds after, the video itself starts. So the movie doesn't need to start, but something needs to show up on screen at the 2 second mark. So you can't have, 30 seconds of black before your main title shows up. It needs to be at least 2 seconds at the start and at the end after your credits are all done. And then it says no color bar, slate, yada, yada. Again, this isn't like a cable thing or anything like that, so you're not going to need any of that. The video must start and end on at least one black frame, so you can't start it right away. You need to have at least one black frame at the beginning and the end. No burned-in subtitles except in the trailer. Partial burned-in subtitles are acceptable for mixed language or inaudible dialogue, and they have some requirements for that. That's pretty niche, so we're not going to focus on that here. Not interlaced, no blended frames, no padding, no watermarks, a logo burned throughout, no URLs or promos, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then a few other things that, again, are a little more niche. So, we're not going to focus too heavily on that. But if you do have questions about something, feel free to leave it in the comments. Now, they do have some resolution requirements. It says minimum we accept a width of 640 pixels and the pixel width and height must always be even numbers. We're just going to focus, I won't worry too much about that. We're just going to make everything standard 1920 by 1080 or 4K if you would like. But for this tutorial, I'm only going to be doing 1920 by 1080 just to make everything easy for every single person. Frame rates, they take all the standard frame rates that we talked about with Amazon before, so I'm not going to go over that again. Avoid duplicated frames or blended frames. They do have chapter breaks, which I have a completely different video on chapter breaks. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. They have some audio requirements, PCM, which we'll get more into later. Again, we're just going to be using stereo, so we're not going to be doing anything crazy. Here's some other audio requirements. We're not going to be talking about this too much right now, but you need to have a good audio file. No clipping, no phasing, no distortion, no dropouts, ticks, pops, etc. Everything needs to sound great. So if your audio mix doesn't sound great, honestly, there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to help you anyway. So hopefully you're coming into this tutorial with the best movie that you possibly could have made. And with the trailer, they have some similar things to Amazon. So we're not going to go over that again, but this is linked in the description if you do want to review it. So now that we've gone over everything, let's actually jump into our video editor and start preparing our file. So here I'm in Adobe Premiere Pro and I have my video file laid out here. Yours might look a little different because this is the master file. So, it's not going to have all the cuts and all that. So just pretend like if you're exporting this in your actual video editor without a master file, which I 100% recommend creating a master file first in ProRes or something like that. Basically just an export, and then you take that export and start making all your deliverables out of that. That's what I did. But if not, you can absolutely export your actual movie with all the cuts and all that. But let's go ahead and get into it. So we got our main video file. So I've already imported all this. So we got my caching out film here. It's a frame rate of 23.976 frames per second. We got the media start and end, blah, blah, blah. It's about 2 hours long. And then I just went ahead, right-clicked, new sequence from clip. I'm not going to make that again because I've already done it. And everything should already match. And once you get to here, you're pretty much done, so long as you followed all the other requirements. So let's double check a couple of things. So we need to make sure that our first thing that comes up on screen is no longer than 2 seconds. So let's check that out really quick. So we're a little longer than 2 seconds. So we're actually going to cut a little bit at the front. And as long as we're on one frame of black at the beginning, we can actually just cut all that out. So we start on black, it's less than 2 seconds, so that's good there. Let's do the same thing at the end. All right, let's just chop off the end there. Okay, so that meets our requirements. We got a black frame, at least one black frame at the end, and then at least one black frame here at the beginning. And it's no less than, or it's at least less than 2 seconds at the beginning and the end like they liked. We also know another big problem a lot of people have is having links and stuff in their credits, which we don't have any links. So keep all your social media pages and, you know, just websites and all that, keep it out because you're going to fail QC if any of those appear. Now, if you did this on YouTube or, you know, like with your trailer especially or anything like that, you'll be able to do that on YouTube or Vimeo or something like that. But with these bigger platforms like Amazon, Filmub, who distributes out to Tubi, Apple, etc., they don't want any of that. So keep it out. Now that we're here, we'll be actually able to render. So I'm going to hit Command M. So we want to go for the format. We want to choose the ProRes, wherever that is. I think that's QuickTime. So we have Apple ProRes that automatically pops up, but we need some more formats. So let's go to more presets. Let's type in ProRes. Let's find our ProRes 422 HQ, QuickTime. Something else I almost forgot to mention because Filmub does, and Amazon too, that they have a certain bitrate requirement too. So if you want to check on that, Adobe Premiere Pro hides this a lot more than they used to. But if you did want to change that for some reason, you would just go to this More tab right here, scroll down, and then you should be able to find the bitrate. So for them, they have it so you can limit it. I guess they changed this a little bit. So I'll show you the H.264 too, because you're able to control that a little bit more. But H2 or the ProRes HQ is going to be the highest quality export possible, which is why obviously they recommend it and why I recommend it as well. So you're not going to have to change too much here. Something I forgot to mention also too, if you need to change the actual like resolution of this, so say you wanted to do like the scope, you can actually change this to a custom size too. So like I got the black bars on here right now because this is a 16:9 file, but let's say I wanted to do the scope, for instance. So that's 2048 by 858, I believe. So this is it's punching in a little bit here because it's trying to fit in that 16:9. But if I wanted to crop in here, I probably should have changed the actual resolution on my timeline here. So let me do that real quick. So 2048 by 858, which will be this resolution right here, but that's that 235 aspect ratio. And then I can just zoom in here in a second, so it actually fits properly. Okay, so now we got the proper resolution. So we'll go back to our export screen. And now you can see we're in the actual resolution. But if I needed to change this to 1080 for some reason, so if I wanted to do 1920 by 1080, now it should add the black bars back in. So you're able to change that pretty easily. Now, if you needed to make any audio changes too, admittedly, I'm not super familiar with the audio, so I just kind of leave it Premiere's export settings because they're pretty good. So they get the audio codec uncompressed, which is fine. We have it in our stereo, but if you need to change to 5.1, it's not going to give me that option right now because this is just stereo. So it's either going to give me mono, 2 channels, or stereo, which is left and right. But I am able to change the bit rate sample as well as the sample rate. So they recommend a minimum of 48 kilohertz, which is this 48,000 hertz right here, and a minimum of 16-bit, a sample size rate of 16-bit. So we're just going to leave that alone. So the standard Premiere export setting for the H.264 should work perfectly fine for you. So you really don't have to do much aside from maybe change the resolution. Filmub requests that you put it in the actual aspect ratio of the film. So like we can go back and match the source so it's back in its natural resolution. But Amazon Prime prefers a 16:9, I believe. That's at least what I used for my film. So I think I created a separate export for this, but you're able to use the same settings essentially. You just need to change this to, a 16:9, which you should be able to do. So full HD in the drop-down menu, you just uncheck this box here and then select full HD, and that should give you the 16:9. If you need to change anything else, also like I said, they prefer the progressive field order. So make sure it's not interlaced. And then you can change the frame rate if you need to, but you should keep everything the same there. So if you shot in 24 or the 23.976, make sure it's the same all across. You don't need to change it to 30 or something goofy like that. Pretty much every platform can take this type of file or this frame rate, so you shouldn't have to do anything goofy there. And then I would keep this aspect setting the same. So if anything, you might need to change these 3 boxes. And I just saw this quality bar right here, so you could probably change that. It's not letting me do it right now, probably because it's in the, HQ setting. But if I needed to change that and make the file a little bit smaller, I guess I could. But real quickly, I'm going to show you how to do H.264 in case you need to do that file format for some reason and keep it small. But we want to try to keep this as high quality as possible. So the same deal as before, we're going to go to our presets, and then we're going to choose H.264. So they have an H.264 setting here. So they have some, they have some standard sizes here. If we're doing this for Filmub, we want to make sure we match our frame size. So we're able to change everything else. So we're going to leave the rest of this alone. The thing that you're going to want to change is going to be more towards the bottom. So we have the bit rate settings here. So we need a constant bit rate. So we want to change this to CBR. They recommend for SD at least 15 megabits per second. And then for 4K UHD HD, they recommend 50 megabits per second. Right now, the standard on Premiere Pro is just 20. So we're just going to crank that up and see where that gets us. I'm going to crank that up all the way up, which 50 is the max. Right now, my estimated file size is about 18 gigabytes. So, my movie right now, I think is around 150 gigabytes with the ProRes HQ. It's not going to give me that. I don't think it gave me that estimated file size, but that's obviously huge compared to 18 gigabytes. Not as big, obviously, but that's obviously much better than if I were to go to like 20. And actually, it's jumping down for some reason. So I guess maybe for that size, it's not going to let me go all the way up to 50. So up to 47. So that actually brings me up to double the size, so about 40 gigabytes, but that's still a third of the size. So like I said, if you're going to do an H.264 file, just try to crank that up as much as possible. If you needed to do the 20, they only recommend for HD at least 15. So if you stuck with the 20, and then again, this is a 2-hour movie, that puts you at about 18 gigabytes. That's not too bad. Hey guys, just a note here. I realized while I was editing this video that I actually made a mistake. So Amazon and Filmub don't necessarily recommend the constant bit rate like I originally thought. They actually prefer the variable bit rate. So we have 2 different options here if you click this drop down menu. So CBR is going to be your first one. That's the constant bit rate. And then we have variable bit rate 1 pass and then variable bit rate 2 pass. Now you should be fine with 1 pass, and this will just give you the 1 bar here. So you can still use the 20. I would actually go up a little bit higher just because with the variable bit rate, basically what it's going to do is it's going to add more data where needed, such as scenes that have like a lot of motion going on or anything like that, and use less data in scenes that may not require so much or just have as much motion or just not require as much data. So that's why they prefer the variable bit rate, because then the file size isn't going to be too massive, whereas with the constant bit rate, it's just going to be 1 constant bit rate throughout the entire movie. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to, those faster motion scenes like I talked about, or just those scenes that may require more data. You may not be using enough data in order for those scenes to look very good. So you can have a lot of pixelation. You can actually see it in my image here right now. It's pretty pixelated because of this. This is actually a YouTube rip that I'm using for this tutorial. So you can still use the constant bitrate if you want. So I'm going to leave that in the video because I think it's good to see, but I would honestly use this variable 1 pass bitrate, or you can even use the 2 pass if you want, which you can actually set a range if you want. So if I wanted to set the target bit rate to 31, for instance, is kind of like my minimum, then I can have a maximum bit rate too. So I can go a little bit higher if I want to, but you should be fine with the 1 pass. I believe that's what I used on my film back in the day. But yeah, just wanted to quickly add that in here just because that information was initially wrong. And then if you wanted to do any of the other, like the Avid or the MPEG or anything else, you would pretty much follow the same steps that I showed you for the ProRes and the H.264. I personally stick to ProRes. I do have some H.264 master files, and then, you know, for like uploading to YouTube and stuff like that, obviously I used an H.264 file for that. But again, I recommend you use the ProRes, but that is how you would change it for any of the other ones if you need to use any of the others. So we got MPEG 2 here, and then we got the, I believe we have the Avid. So here's the Avid. So that's pretty much how this would work on any video editor you would use. I'm not going to show you how to use any of the other ones, but you'd go in your export settings and hopefully they have these settings. If they don't, you might have to use a different editor like Premiere, Resolve, or Final Cut, but that's pretty much a basic rundown of how to export your file. After that, we just export, and theoretically we should be good. We'll upload it to Amazon or Filmub from there. This is how I've exported everything to Amazon and Filmub in the past, and I haven't had any issues, so I definitely recommend just this very, very simple process right here. But now that we know what needs to be done, let's actually talk about some common issues that you may run into. So one issue that I'm constantly asked about all the time is the overcompression error given by Amazon or Filmub during QC. Now, I know most of you that are watching this channel are no-budget filmmakers like myself, doing everything for the least amount of money possible. You probably don't have infinite hard drive space to store massive files. For me personally, my master file for caching out was over 150 gigabytes, and I do have multiple versions of that. So if you do lack hard drive space, you're probably thinking to yourself, am I going to be able to make a small video file such as H.264 like I was talking about earlier? As long as it's a high quality version of that and it meets all the bitrate requirements that they list on their website, yes, maybe. But the problem I see more than not is that people are trying to make, you know, take like my movie's 2 hours long, you know, my master file for an H.264 is probably 15 gigabytes. That is something they have accepted in the past, but people are trying to take like a file that size and compress it down to less than, you know, a gigabyte. That's not a good idea. I recommend buying a cheap hard drive. I mean, hard drives are a lot cheaper than when I made my film. You can usually get a terabyte for around $60 on Amazon right now. Get any Western Digital 1 terabyte external hard drive, and that should be more than enough for you just for one movie. But needless to say, you really need the highest quality file possible. I actually had somebody come to me who had this problem, and it was because they ripped their movie off YouTube. That's a big no-no. It's never going to work. Just don't do it. You need to have a high quality file or none of these platforms are going to accept your movie. Another big problem I see is that 2-second pre and post roll thing that we talked about at the beginning and the end of your film. You need to make sure your film starts no later than 2 seconds after you hit play and it ends 2 seconds after your credits roll. Now you can shrink that down to less than 2 seconds if you desire, but just make sure that you have no more than 2 seconds of black at the head and the tail of your film. Amazon will probably take it if it's like 5 seconds or something like that, but Filmub absolutely will not. Just keep it simple, keep it less than 2 seconds, and you'll be able to use one file for both of these platforms. Another common issue I see is people putting links or promos or anything like that in their credits or over the movie or something like that. Both of these platforms are very strict. I actually had a client that I worked with who had a fake one inside of their movie, and they denied us or, you know, caused an uproar in QC because they thought it was a real promo, but it was a promo within the story. So that's how strict they are. Keep your websites, social media links, all that, just keep it out. And there's a whole bunch of other QC problems, including, you know, your movie isn't synced properly, your subtitles don't match the spoken words that are on screen, your audio is poor. There's a whole plethora of problems that I can list, and they all have one simple solution. You really need to be watching your movie and making the highest quality film that you possibly can. So I kind of got that backwards. Make the highest quality film that you possibly can, and before you actually export and deliver your films to these platforms, make sure there is no problems in your sound. Make sure the sound is good. Make sure the picture's good. Make sure if you have any subtitles, those are good. Have a colleague in the field double check it for you if you don't trust yourself to accomplish this correctly. It's really going to minimize the amount of problems that you have later. That is what I've done for all of my films. I have not personally had any QC issues, but even the QC issues I've had with my clients, we were able to solve all of those pretty quick by doing a lot of those simple things that I talked about. So you really shouldn't have any issues submitting if you have a good quality film and follow what I've said. But if you do have issues, feel free to leave me a comment or shoot me an email, which is linked in my bio. Now let's move on to creating chapter breaks. I'm going to be sharing with you my #1 tip for making more money on Filmub right now. No, it's not shooting that car chase that you can't afford. And no, you don't even have to shoot a Tarantino style foot scene. This tip is something that I think is very overlooked just because I don't think Filmub is doing a very great job of advertising it as an important piece of information that you need. This was something that I even overlooked for the first 2 years that I was on Filmub. Doing this brought me from making pennies every month to hundreds of dollars. That tip is adding chapter breaks to your film. What does that mean exactly? Do you remember back in the old DVD days when you would go to the main home screen and there would be the scenes at the bottom that you could select? Or better yet, in the cable TV days, you'd have a commercial that would come on every 5 to 15 minutes during your favorite shows. Well, friends, that's essentially what you're doing. You're marking places on your film where an ad can be placed. So why does this matter exactly? The big reason is that Filmub and the platforms are not going to do this for you. If this metadata isn't imported by you, then it's just going to get ignored. Because of this, you're not going to be able to get on AVOD platforms like Tubi or Vudu or anything else that utilizes the advertising-based video on demand model. In my opinion, AVOD platforms are the bread and butter for small independent filmmakers like myself. It tends to pay a lot better and you're not relying on small insignificant subscription fees. Platforms like Tubi use the CPM model or cost per milli. YouTube actually utilizes this same model, which basically means that they are paying you a set ad rate for every 1,000 views. The CPM can range from pennies all the way up to tens of dollars. For an example, if you have a CPM of $10, that means the platform is going to pay you $10 for every 1,000 views. There's a little bit more nuance to that when it comes to YouTube, but that's the basic explanation of it. I don't know how Tubi's CPM model works, but I've heard down the grapevine from other filmmakers that this is what they use. And this is kind of really important to know too, because if you haven't noticed, a lot of these platforms, especially like Netflix and Amazon and HBO, are now starting to use the AVOD model. I personally make $200 to $300 a month just from Tubi because of the AVOD model. I don't know how they calculate these numbers, but $200 to $300 a month means that people are watching my small movie. Now, one of the best things about this is that it can be free to create these chapter breaks. If you haven't submitted your film yet on Tubi, then congratulations, you're going to be able to do this for free. However, if you've already submitted your film, then it's probably going to cost over $100 for them to open it up to you to put in the chapter breaks. It can be worth it in the long run, but that is something you want to keep in mind. So let's do a quick tutorial on how to create these. Okay, so conveniently, Tubi actually has some instructions on how to do this, so it's a pretty easy walkthrough. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Filmub, and then you're going to select your movie and edit it. Now, on the video page, right when you open it up, you're going to be met with your main file, the captions, and then the chapters. You're going to want to hit add, and then you're going to have a chapter pop up. So you have the chapter name, and then you have the time code, and then you have the thumbnail time code. Now, what I would do personally and what I did with my film is you're going to want to go into your film and watch it, and then mark spots where it's not going to be super disruptive for there to be an ad. Obviously, you don't want to do this in the middle of the scene or, something like that. So you're going to want to be paying attention to when the best places are in your film to put a chapter. Now, Filmub does have some requirements for these. You're going to want to be paying attention to that. So let's go over their tips quickly. It is best to place a chapter after a scene's end or before a major lighting change. I kind of went over that, but the lighting change is something interesting to note too. Try to avoid placing ad breaks in the middle of a monologue, dialogue, or action sequence. Again, I just mentioned that you don't want to place one mid-scene. It is best to find a scene with black frames in between. If not available, use the time code of the first frame of the next scene/shot. And then Filmub says that you can use their player to find the best places to identify chapter breaks. Now, a couple of other things that you're going to want to keep in mind is that you cannot have a chapter in the first or last 5 minutes. So you got to wait till at least after the first 5 minutes to place any sort of chapter. And of course, you can't do it in the last 5 minutes either. And obviously, you're probably not going to want to put one in the middle of the credits because nobody has done that ever. And it's just kind of annoying. So to continue, it says after the first chapter, each subsequent chapter must be every 8 to 12 minutes. Your first chapter break can be any point after 5 minutes. So my rule of thumb, just find a place roughly every 10 minutes or so. If you want to do 8 minutes to try to squeeze in more ads, be my guest. But I've found that on average, when I've done this for myself and some of the people I've helped get their films on Filmub, 10 minutes is roughly about where I found, a good place to put a chapter. Chapter 1 always starts at time code 00000. So obviously your first chapter is going to be your first scene. So what they're talking about is no chapters in the first 5 minutes. Your first 5 minutes is going to be your first chapter. So if your second chapter would be at 5 minutes and 1 second, if that makes sense. For titles less than 20 minutes, only 2 chapters are allowed. So you're going to want to keep that in mind if you're making short films. For titles less than 10 minutes, you're not allowed to have any chapters. So any short films under 10 minutes, sorry, you're kind of out of luck here. Anything over 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes, you're going to be able to put 2 in there. All time codes must be frame accurate, and frames in the time codes must match the video's frame rate or you will not be able to submit. For example, entering 27 at FF for 24 frames per second video is invalid. Okay, so now that we have an idea of what we need to be doing, let's go ahead and create some example chapters. So we know for our first chapter that we're going to have to put the time code at 00000000. And I assume you could put the thumbnail at 00000002. But if you have a better thumbnail for a different part within that scene, you can go ahead and mark that as your time code. Okay, so I got my movie pulled up here. Normally you're going to want to do this in something like Adobe Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve so you can get the exact frame count on here. But I'm recording my audio currently for this tutorial in Premiere Pro, so I'm not going to be able to do that. So we're just going to have to suspend our disbelief here and just do this in QuickTime. But I'm just going to kind of scroll through. So obviously we have to mark our first chapter break at 00000, as we mentioned. So we're going to want to go after 5 minutes. So I'm going to find a scene roughly after 5 minutes. And luckily my opening scene is more than 5 minutes. So this should be pretty easy to find. Okay, so we got a scene change right here. So you can see there's a pretty dramatic shift right there. So it happens right at 7:16. So we're just going to call this chapter 1 for now. It doesn't really matter what you call your chapters. If you want to go a little bit crazier with it, you're more than welcome to. So we're going to call this chapter 2. And let's just say that, so it's broken down into hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. So this happens at 0 hours, at 7 minutes, 16 seconds. And just like I said, let's suspend our disbelief here for a second. Let's just say that happens at frame 1. And I want my thumbnail. Let's see if there's a more interesting thumbnail. So let's say that our thumbnail's right here and we want to add a more interesting thumbnail. So this happens at 7 minutes and 34 seconds. So we'll just say hour 00:07:34, and we'll just say 01. Okay, and then for our next chapter, we have to wait for another 8 to 10 minutes. So let's go ahead. So we're at 7:16 right now. So that would be roughly at the 15-minute mark. So let's go ahead and find something around 15 minutes. So this would have been a great chapter break, but unfortunately it happens a little too early. So I think right there. So 16:39. So we're going to call chapter 3 and then 00:16:39. Again, we're suspending our disbelief for the frame count, but you know what? We'll just add, we'll say happens at frame 23. It's in 24 frames per second. Frame 23, that's right before it jumps over to the next second. But that's essentially all you're going to do. You're just going to keep going through every 8 to 12 minutes like it suggests, and you're just going to find the best non-disruptive places to put your chapter breaks. Just go through the entire movie. Again, make sure you're not doing this within the last 5 minutes. But other than that, I mean, this is pretty easy to do. And it's something, like I said, I think it's something that's very overlooked. I didn't do this for the first 2 years and I missed out a lot of money because of that. I've actually helped a couple people get their films on Filmub and they got on Tubi immediately. I would assume just because of this. Obviously, you know, there's some other factors there, but if they didn't have this, they wouldn't be getting on Tubi. I got on Tubi probably like a month after I added this to my film, and I wish I would have done it a lot sooner. Now let's move on to creating closed captions. One of the questions I get asked the most about indie film distribution is how to create closed caption files. In this video, I'm going to be showing you the easiest way to get these done. I want to start this video by saying that I have self-distributed my film through Amazon Prime Video Direct as well as Filmub. So what I'm going to do here is going to work on both of these platforms and most likely other platforms as well. However, closed caption files are pretty universal, so you should be able to use this tutorial anywhere that requires captions. You will 100% need to create closed captions for your film if you're going to try to get on any major platform. Every platform, with the exception of YouTube or Vimeo, requires you to have a closed caption file. If you are looking to self-distribute through Amazon Prime or Filmub like I did, you are definitely going to need one of these. Long ago in a faraway YouTube land, I used to recommend that if you couldn't afford to pay somebody to do the closed caption files, that you could create them yourself. And the following years, I was met with a lot of comments and emails from people who started having QC problems after doing this. I want to say on the record that I no longer recommend creating closed caption files yourself. That's fine if you're doing this on YouTube or Vimeo, where the requirements and all that don't matter as much, but for any professional platforms like Tubi, Amazon, Apple, and such, you're going to want to get these professionally made. I personally like Rev.com. I've been using Rev for about 5 years now, and I've yet to have any QC problems with either of these platforms. Full disclosure, I do have an affiliate link in the description of this video if you decide to use this service. It helps me a lot with creating these videos, but you're absolutely not required to use it. Or if you want to use some other service, that's fine too. Or if you want to use Rev and just not use my affiliate link, 100% okay with that too. However, if you do want to use my link, of course, I'm going to love you for it. So let's get into actually creating the closed caption files. Before we get started, we need to look at the requirements for both Amazon and Filmub. I have both of these linked in the description for easy reference. Now, I will say if you use a service like Rev.com, you can pretty much forgo all of this because the files that they create will 100% work on their service. And the same goes for Filmub, but it's good to review this and be familiar with it if you are trying to attempt to do this yourself and not listen to me. But let's just go over this really quickly. So for the United States, you need to have a separate caption files in the localized language. For the United Kingdom, you need to have audio or captions in the localized language, as well as Germany. And if you are doing this in Japan, you need to have burned in subtitles in the localized language. And it says, for example, if you created a movie in English and you want to have German closed captions, here are how your movie will be impacted in each location. US, you will not be able to publish your movie with German captions. You are required to have separate English CC file. United Kingdom, you can publish your movie with German's closed captions because the film already has an English audio track. Germany, you can publish in Germany because you have added a localized German closed caption file. Japan, you will need to burn in Japanese subtitles into the movie. Closed captions aren't toggle-able for customers in Japan, so even if you upload German closed captions for the movie, it will not be visible to customers. And here's some additional requirements. All captions must conform to match the video source, obviously. All dialogue in video files requires captions in the native language for the content. English captions are required for all titles published in the United States. For an example, in a movie listed as available in the United States, all dialogue in English or any other language spoken in the movie must have corresponding English captions. I'm going to skip this next one. All time text needs to start at the 0-hour time code, obviously. Prime Video only accepts captions files that are UTF-8 character encoded. When working with a third-party captions provider, please ensure that captions output the UTF-8 encoded. We provide a collection of sample files for various caption file formats. Again, you should be able to accomplish this on Rev. If you have both captions and subtitles available for a title, we prefer to receive closed captions /HCH to improve the viewing experience for customers who are deaf and hard of hearing. The language of a title's metadata determines the locations to which it can be published. A mezzanine or caption file matching the metadata language is required to publish to that location. And then they have some information about what type of file that you can use. They have a whole bunch listed here, but we are going to focus on the .srt file because that is the most universal between all these platforms. And then they have some other information for subtitles and content without dialogue. If you want to read that, again, this is linked in the description. I'm not going to be going over it here because I assume that you are making a silent film and you aren't using a lot of subtitles. But if you are, the information is obviously here as well. Okay, so that is all the information for the captions on Amazon. So we're going to move over to Filmub now. These are pretty much going to be the same, but we're going to go over a few different things. We require all content be submitted with English subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, SDH. So when you see SDH on Filmub or Amazon, that's what they're talking about. They talk about why they require this, but we're not going to go over that. You can read that on your own if you want. We just want to get right into the requirements. We prefer the subrip, which is the .srt format, in plain UTF-8, which is exactly what Amazon requires too. And they also have one other acceptable file that you can use, but we're not going to use that. Single line max, 43 characters, unbreak subtitles shorter than 43 characters. Here's a couple other requirements, but again, since we're creating these in Rev, we're not going to worry about that too much. They do have some stuff for mixed language titles. I'm not familiar with that, so I'm not comfortable talking about it. But if you do have mixed language, there is some information here about that. And they do have some tips and tricks for submitting. But again, we're not going to worry about that too much because this is a pretty easy to follow tutorial and this should work for you. So now let's go into actually creating the closed captions. So we're going to go to rev.com, which you're going to want to make an account. So go ahead and make an account. I'm going to log into mine. Now, when you log into Rev, you're going to be met with all of your other files. So I've created a bunch, as you can see here. So there's a testament to how well this works for me. They recommend, or they say they have like 99% accuracy. I found that to be pretty much true. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but let's go ahead and kind of talk about how you're going to do this. So when you log into Rev, or a place like Rev if you're not using Rev, but with Rev specifically, we're going to go into place a new order, and then we're going to select one of these. Now, they do have a few different options here: human transcripts, AI transcripts, human captions, AI captions, and then global subtitles. Now, they do have different pricing for each of these, so we're not going to focus on the transcriptions. We're just interested in the captions. So for the AI captions, they will do it for 25 cents per minute. Now for a human, it's going to cost you $1.50 per minute. I've never personally used the AI captions before, but it is a very good option for what I'm about to show you next once we actually get into after they actually do their captions. So if you're looking to save a bunch of money, I guess you could do that, but I've only personally used the human-based captions. So choose wisely, I guess. So I'm just going to pick AI captions for now. And then from here, you're either going to upload your file. So if you have your main video file, if it's like a smaller H.264 file or something, that's 100% okay. If you have a link that's online, you can do that too. Or you can pull the video directly from YouTube or Vimeo. So those are definitely viable options as well. I don't remember exactly what I did. I want to say that I uploaded the file. So you do have the ability to do that. And then this is per, the 25 cents or the $1.50 is per minute. So for an example, my movie is about 118 minutes long. So for the AI captions at 118 minutes, that would put me at about $30. And for the human captions, that would put me at about $180-ish. So you can see that's a pretty big difference with the AI. They say they can do it within 98% accuracy. So if you need to save a little bit of money, I guess, you know, you do have that option available to you, but you may have to do more editing work. So once you decide on whatever file that you're going to upload, you'll add your file, you'll sign in if you're not already signed in, and then it'll tell you what it's going to cost you, and then you'll pay for it. And then after that, it'll say, oh, this is going to take 24 hours, 48 hours, something like that. I usually have gotten all my files back within a day, and that's even with the human. So just know it may take a couple of days, but this service has always been relatively fast for me. And then once you actually get the file, it's going to show up on here. You'll get an email for it, but You can also just log into your account, and then you're going to have, it's going to show up on this main screen here. Now, the nice thing about Rev, and I'm sure many of these other companies too, is that you're able to double check your files before you actually download them. So if something isn't right, you're able to pull up this caption editor. So you just select the movie, and then you're actually able to, you can see we got the whole screen here. So I'm going to turn the audio down, but if I were to play, now my captions are going to show up here, and I can double check everything is spelled correctly and all that. So this is where using the AI one may be okay, because you have the ability to double check all the captions are done. So they're going to make sure that the captions are done properly as far as formatting, making sure, what, like, as you can see here on screen, this is anxious electronic music. So there is some requirements on what they need to use. And then also on this next caption right here, you can actually see a character's name. They do ask if you have like a script or, a list of characters and stuff like that. Anything that would help them out, you can absolutely upload that as well. Because I didn't get very far in the purchasing process, it didn't pop up for me. But if you do have a script available or just some sort of sheet with all of your characters' names and all that, it definitely helps them, but it's not required. And then there are some additional things you can do. So we have the original version. You can change the atmospherics if you need to. You can replace casual words with formal. For an example, gonna to going to, which is something I've done before. Replacing US words with UK spelling. And removing gaps between captions. You do have all these options to do that before you actually download the file. And then they do have some keyboard shortcuts. You can actually search for certain words, spelling check, etc. But once you're done, everything's edited and everything's exactly how you want it, you'll be able to download your file. So we're going to go to the top right corner here, select download. And this is where you're going to be able to download whatever file type you need. So it's going to ask you which file types you need, but I don't know why they do that when they just give you all the options anyway, but we want the .srt file format. So you'll be able to select that wherever that is. Let's look for it real quick. It's the first option. So they make that very easy for you. They have some advanced options here on when you want to start it. We need to start this at 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. This should match the frame rate of your movie. So whatever file you upload, make sure that's the frame rate that you want across the board on every single platform, and it should match. Then you just hit download, and then you just download it like a normal file. And that's pretty much it. It's really, really simple. That's why I recommend doing it. With the new AI options, they make it a little bit cheaper. So that way, if you need to save a little bit of money, you have the ability to do that and still get your captions professionally made. That's all the basics for closed caption files. But now let's get into some of the most common issues you may run into when creating these. So the issue that I see the most with filmmakers is that their closed caption files do not sync properly with their film. There is a simple fix for this, and I'm going to show you it right now. So I have Premiere Pro open right now. I have my film, and I imported my .srt file. Now you can see here it says 30 frames per second, but honestly, they all say 30 frames per second. It should still match whatever frame rate that you uploaded with. So what I'm going to do, I have my video file on its own timeline. I'm going to add the closed captions to the timeline. And then you just want this to start at the source code time. And then up here, you should see all of your closed caption files show up. So now what you're going to want to do, go through your film and make sure everything matches. So once you go through, double check all your captions, make sure everything's aligned how you want, you'll be able to export your film, which you don't actually have to export the entire film. You could just export the closed caption file, or you could just export a low res version of this. But in the export settings, you have this caption setting here, and it will export in the .srt format. Just select create sidecar file, and it'll create a file just like we downloaded from rev.com. And from there, it should match your frame rate. Now you're going to want to double check that this still matches inside the platforms. Amazon makes this a little bit difficult, but you should be able to do this inside of Filmub. They have a native video player. Once you upload your film and the captions, they have a video player, and you can double check, make sure everything lines up. From there, you can take it to Amazon and assume that everything's going to work fine if you get that error. And the next most common error is the frame rate error within your closed captions. Again, inside Premiere, if your frame rate is not correct, like mine is not currently, Like I said, you're able to move all your captions around. So if you got to move them around a little bit to make them match, you're able to do that pretty easily. And then just follow the same process for actually exporting the .srt file. There are a few less common issues that I won't get into here, but I will link resources to both Amazon and Filmub in the description if you do run into anything that I haven't talked about. Now let's move on to creating your artwork files. Artwork seems to be the bane of most filmmakers' existence, and yet it seems to be one of the items that they think about most. What do I mean by that exactly, and what am I talking about with artwork? The poster. The thing that gets film snobs like you or I to go to a theater or to click on Netflix. You absolutely need to create an effective poster in order to get people to watch your film. However, that's only part of the battle when it comes to indie film distribution. Platforms like Amazon Prime Video Direct or Filmub do have a bunch of requirements that makes this a little complicated. So in this video, I'm going to be going over what you need to know to submit on platforms like Amazon and Filmub and get your poster art right. Let's get into it. I want to emphasize something right away. I cannot stress this enough. You are going to need a layered image file in order to do all the size requirements that each of these platforms will need. Most people don't understand what I'm talking about when I say layered image file. I created my poster art inside of Adobe Photoshop like you can see here. Now, when I say layered image file, I mean that everything is sort of a layer on this poster art. So we have the image. So all this right here in the background is an image that I took on a camera. We have the text for all the names of the people in the movie. We have the text for the title of the movie itself, and then we have the text for the written directed by me, yada yada. Each one of these elements is a layer. So for an example, I can take my name out if I need to, or I can take out the actors' names if I need to, or I can move this caching out text if I need to. That's what I'm talking about when I say layered image file. This file I have right here is a layered Photoshop file. You're going to have a really difficult time creating all this different sizes and stuff that Amazon and Filmub require if you're not able to move the text and other pieces around like that. A lot of people inquire to me about helping them with their films, and honestly, like, I can't do what I need to do if you just give me a JPEG or a PNG file. If you are getting poster art made, make sure you are emphasizing with whoever your graphic designer is that you need a PSD Photoshop file or some other layered image file like this. You can stack everything on top of each other. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about some of the requirements of both Amazon and Filmub. They're pretty much going to be the same. So aside from maybe some size differences and some minor tweaks, you should be able to pretty much do the same thing between both platforms. So I will have both of these linked in the description for easy reference, but let's go over Amazon's really quick. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here just because you can read this on your own time, and I want to try to keep this video as consumable as possible. So for the editorial requirements, when present in artwork, title treatment must be clearly displayed and legible even when shown on smaller devices. If not, an alternate must be created. Season level images should contain the title treatment only and no additional text like season number or volume number. Prime Video sometimes adds an icon in the upper left-hand corner of the image for titles. To avoid overlap, we require that your images do not include critical material in this area. The sizes of those icons vary depending on the device. There's some stuff for TV here, but I'm not going to get into that because I'm talking about films specifically. And of course, they recommend having stuff within the safe zones. Restricted content, logos or callouts, so don't put any logos or marks, watermarks, etc. No credits, no laurels, so keep your actors out, keep any film festivals out. Like, they just want it clean. So like for this example here, I know it says Amazon Original, but you know, it's Amazon's movie or whatever this is. So of course they can put that at the top, but it's just an image and the title. Down here, the same thing. Image and then title with the exception of this Amazon Original. And then here's some other things of stuff that they require, such as like not having borders, sex and nudity, adult language, legibility, drugs, violence, spoilers, etc. So I'm going to let you read that on your own time. I'm just going to show you specifically how to create these files yourself. It's up to you to make sure that everything, you know, fits within their requirements. And there's a couple other things, so you can't stretch it. So you can see here with this Manchester by the Sea, they have it just stretched a couple different ways. You can't do that. It needs to fit uniformly. You can't do something goofy like here with these 3 different images in the title. You can't just, crop your poster and have bars on the side like that. And your poster needs to fit within the whole 16:9 frame. So keep that in mind. So for your main arts, you're going to have a 16:9, 19:20 by 1080 JPEG or PNG file. They also require a 3:4, 1200 by 1600 JPEG or PNG. And if you have a background image, which isn't necessarily required, that's also 1920 by 1080. So all this is pretty simple so long as you read everything that they allow and don't allow and just follow the simple requirements. So now we'll hop over to Filmub really quick. They have a bunch of different sizes. I'm not going to go over these individually. I'll show you how to create a couple of these or how I've done it in the past. But, if you need a list of all the different sizes, they're listed here, but they're also listed as you're going through all the metadata when you actually upload to Filmub. And then they have some different sizes for TV shows too. So they actually have some please do's and please do not. Include the title of your film, match the title and the artwork the same as the title submitted, ensure it's readable at a thumbnail size, use the same imagery and fonts. And this is the same thing for Amazon. Everything needs to look consistent. So you can't have one poster art design. I'll show you really quick here in Photoshop because I have 2 different poster designs. So we have poster design number 1. If you have a second poster, you can't change that. It needs to, all of your artwork, you need to choose one image and each size needs to look relatively the same. Submit a JPEG or PNG. They have some best practices. Please do not nest or collage. It's pretty much all the same do nots as Amazon. So I'm not really going to get into that here. So like they got the goofy, images like that. And then this one has a subtitle right here and laurels, which you can't have right here. Clean image, title, everything looks the same. So these 2 images pretty much look the same relatively. You can't crop in like that and you can't stretch the image. And of course, with both platforms, try to keep in mind this safe zone with your text and all that in case they have to do any cropping on any of the different platforms. So let's actually go into Photoshop and let's create a couple samples so that way you can kind of get an idea of what you're going to have to do. So there's 2 things wrong with my poster art right off the bat. I have a border here, which they don't allow borders. I have my actors' names, and then I have my name here at the bottom. So all I'm really allowed to have is this main background here and my title. So we're going to go ahead and create a new file, and then we're going to go ahead and start with the 2x3 because that's going to be pretty close to what we have now. So their 2x3 is 1400 by 2100, and we're going to leave resolution at 300. So now what I can do is I'm going to copy my background, paste it into here. It's going to be massive, so I'm going to have to shrink this down. Okay, so now let's go ahead and fit this. So it's not going to fit 100%, but again, we can't have borders. Okay, so we got that. And now let's copy my text, just the logo. So I'll make my caching out here a little bit smaller. And I'm going to center that, make it a little bit bigger just because I need to fill in some negative space. So we'll get that roughly in the center where to go. Okay, close enough. So this is essentially what my poster is going to look like. And then from there, you're going to want to try to create multiple versions of this. So I'm going to have to create a 16:9 image as well. So I'm going to go to new and let's create their 16:9 is 19:20 by 1080. And we'll do the same thing. So this is going to look a little bit different. I actually moved some elements around here. So this isn't going to be a very good accurate representation of what I actually would do here. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'm just going to do this. Let's make that a little smaller so we can at least see the poker chips a little bit. So we can't see much here, but just for the sake of the tutorial, we're going to do that. And I'll actually show you all of my artwork that I submitted on Filmub. So this is roughly what it's going to look like. And then both of these look similar enough to where this is going to get accepted by the QC. Now I'm going to log into Filmub really quick, and I'm going to show you what all my poster art looks like so you can kind of get an idea of how to move things around if you need to do this yourself. So here on Filmub, you can see I've got all the different artwork, and I changed things around quite a bit. So like I moved the cards and the money and the poker chips and the ski mask around. And then I have these laid out in all these different aspect ratios that they ask for. Some of these are optional, so you can keep that in mind. But honestly, like most of these are pretty close. So like the 16:9 is going to be pretty similar to this 16:6 or this 4:3 or this 2:1. Those are all pretty similar. And then your 2:3 and your 3:4 are going to be pretty much the same too. So you don't really have any reason not to. And you don't want to give them any reason not to, accept your film for some reason. So I would definitely recommend creating poster art for all of these. Obviously, I'm only spending a couple seconds on this, so you're going to want to spend some more time to make sure everything is formatted correctly. But this gives you an idea of what they mean by like all your poster art needs to look the same. And then for Amazon, you can see down here at the bottom, they did allow the actors' names, which I'm a little confused about, but I would probably change this at this point to match what I've done on Filmub. You don't have to, but you can. And then I have my Prime icon here, which should be the same as my Filmub one. So here's my 16:9. You can see that matches pretty much with the one for Amazon Prime. So try to make everything relatively the same, so that way it's universal between both platforms. Okay, let's go ahead and look at how to export one of these really quick. So I have my Prime icon right here. So let's say you're all said and done. You got all of your sizes figured out. Again, all the sizes as far as resolution are in the link in the description on Filmub or Amazon. Amazon's pretty easy. It's only 1920 by 1080. I don't remember the 4:3, but again, that will be included in the description. And then Filmub has various sizes that I will have listed in the description as well. But let's say that you needed to export this. Let's go ahead. In Photoshop, at least, this is going to be different from platform to platform, but here's how to do it in Photoshop at least. So you're going to hit File, Export, and then you're going to go Export As. And then again, they recommend either a JPEG or PNG. A JPEG is going to be a lot smaller than a PNG, so it's a little bit more manageable size. If you want something a little higher quality, I would definitely go with PNG, but again, that's up to you. And then we want to make sure, so this is a little bit bigger. I usually make all of my sizes a little bit bigger just so they're higher resolution, and then I can bring them down a little bit if needed. So we need to make this 1920 by 1080, and this should automatically do it. So 50% of the size that it was. And then all you have to do is hit export. That's it. And you're going to do this for every single one of your different sizes. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's really simple so long as you have that layered Photoshop file or image file like I had talked about. If you are using a JPEG file, then you're going to have to figure out either how to take off the text. So, like Photoshop is a lot more advanced than when I was using it before. So let's say, I needed to get rid of all of my actors' names so I could, rope it here, which that was pretty poor. Let me do that again. So if I needed to get rid of the actors' names right here, so what I could do is I could, cut that out by itself. And then I could also just get rid of it if I need to with the generative AI fill. So we'll let that do its thing here. So I could at least get rid of all the text and stuff like that. And then I'd be able to move it around if needed. So that didn't do the best job because you can definitely tell that something was there at some point, but you do have the option to do that. But again, this is why I stress so much, get that layered Photoshop file. It's going to make your life so much easier. And honestly, any QC problems that you might have is just that you have, laurels, you have website links, you're just not following the directions like I had talked about. All you can have for your artwork on both platforms, just to keep it universal, is your main image file and the text title for the movie. And the text title for the movie needs to match what you put in Amazon or Filmub. So you can't have some other, if my film was called Cashing Out and then on the poster art I put something else, that's obviously not going to work. My title's Cashing Out and it needs to say Cashing Out on the poster art, and it matches exactly what it shows on the poster. And the same pretty much goes for Amazon. I will link the common issues that I see the most in the description if you want to go over that yourself on your own time. But if there are issues I have not listed, feel free to comment those in the comments or send me an email, which is linked in my bio, and I will answer those questions as best as I possibly can. So those are all the deliverables you should need for distributing on Amazon and Filmub. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I will be happy to answer as best I can. If you're ready to take those next steps and actually upload your film to these platforms, I do have video tutorials linked somewhere here below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.